is greater than hunt for ghosts, is greater than. In the flickering amber glow of a street lamp, a man named Joe stood shivering. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and wet wool. He was a thief, a professional, and on this night, he was about to steal the impossible. Not diamonds, not gold bars, but the United States mail. An offense so sacrosanct, so blasphemous in the eyes of the young American government that the punishment for interfering with it was often worse than murder. The year was 1926. The place was Elizabeth, New Jersey. And what Joe and his crew were about to do a heist of such audacity and scale that it would net them what was, at the time, the single largest monetary haul in U.S. History would not only define the Roaring Twenties' most brutal chapter, but would, in a twist of fate, be the catalyst for the creation of the modern FBI and its infamous 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. Part 1. The Gilded Age's Last Score. Chapter 1. The Riches of the Iron Horse. The American economy ran on faith, but it was funded by the railroad. By the mid-1922, the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad, Pennsy, was the undisputed artery of national commerce. Its tracks were the veins and highways that linked the bustling financial centers of New York and Chicago to the burgeoning industrial heartland. And every night, a train known simply as Train No. 5, or sometimes the bank train, carried more concentrated wealth than many small European nations. This wasn't just commuter rail. Train number 5 was a moving vault. It was composed of several specialized, heavily armored railway post office, RPO cars. These cars were the de facto mobile banks of the nation, carrying everything from payrolls for massive factories to certified checks, bonds, and critically, huge volumes of cash destined for Federal Reserve banks and trust companies. On any given journey, the total value inside these steel boxes routinely exceeded $10 million in 1926 dollars, an astonishing sum equivalent to over $170 million today. The security was designed to be absolute. Each RPO car was crewed by armed, veteran postal inspectors, hardened, loyal men who were often former military. The cars had no external door handles. Once the train was moving, they could only be opened from the inside by a guard, or by a special railway key held only by the highest-ranking postal officials at the destination. The windows were mere slits, and the steel plate was thick enough to withstand all but the largest artillery. But security is only as strong as its weakest link, and the weak link in 1926 was a simple human failing: greed, aided by an insider. Chapter 2. The Architect of Audacity. The man behind the curtain was a forgotten legend of American crime, Willie D'Urso. Unlike the flamboyant gangsters of Prohibition, the Al Capones and Dutch Schultzes, D'Urso was quiet, meticulous, and utterly ruthless. His genius lay not in muscle, but in logistics. D'Urso realized that attacking the train while moving or at a major station was suicide. He needed a place where the train was vulnerable, where security protocols were temporarily suspended, and where his men could melt back into the urban sprawl. He found his spot in Elizabeth, New Jersey, the Insider. D'Urso's crucial piece of intelligence came from a source deep within the rail yards. While the official accounts are still contested, the most reliable version points to a corrupted switchman or a low-level postal employee in the Newark terminal who was swimming in gambling debt. This man provided D'Urso with the holy grail of information: the exact routing and scheduling of train number 5, including its brief, scheduled, unattended stop in Elizabeth to pick up a single, large shipment of mail. The layout of the specialized RPO car, known as Car No. 46 on this specific run, detailing the precise location of the valuable registered mail sacks. Most importantly, the time window. The train would sit on an isolated siding in the Elizabeth yard for a crucial 20-minute window, while a local crew managed the switch. Chapter 3. The Night of the 11th Hour. The date was the 11th of September, 1926. D'Urso assembled a crew of 11 men. He chose specialists, expert safecrackers, seasoned wheelmen, drivers, and men who could hold their nerve under fire. They arrived in Elizabeth in 3 stolen, unmarked, heavy-duty Pierce Arrow touring cars, the luxury cars of the day, chosen for their speed and ability to carry heavy loads. The scene of the crime was a secluded, poorly lit stretch of track near the Elizabeth Avenue overpass. Asterisk, the interruption. At 1:30 a.m., train number 5 shuddered to a halt. As planned, the engineer and fireman dismounted to check the engine, believing they were only waiting for a routine track switch. Asterisk, the assault. In a move of terrifying efficiency, D'Urso's men, armed with sawed-off shotguns and Thompson submachine guns, Tommy guns, a relatively new, shocking weapon for civilian use, materialized from the shadows. The few armed guards at the rear of the train were quickly overpowered. Asterisk, the locksmith's nightmare. The RPO car, car No. 46, was the fortress. D'Urso's men bypassed the standard door key system with chilling expertise. Using powerful acetylene torches, a cutting-edge industrial tool, they didn't pick the locks. They simply cut a hole in the heavy steel side of the car, big enough for a man to climb through. Is greater than fact check. The use of acetylene torches on a moving rail car was highly novel. It demonstrated D'Urso's willingness to employ industrial-level tools, signifying a frightening escalation in criminal methods, a move from simple break-ins to engineering-level breaches. Inside, the spectacle was overwhelming. Mail sacks were everywhere. The crew worked with frenzied speed, sorting the sacks based on the insider's blueprint. They ignored the common correspondence and focused entirely on the registered mail pouches marked with the red tags indicating exceptional value. They secured 163 registered mail sacks. The contents were staggering: cash, Liberty bonds, government securities, and gold-backed notes. The total official haul, conservatively estimated later by the Post Office Department, was $2,437,133.47. At the time, this was a national sensation, eclipsing any other robbery in U.S. history. By 1:55 a.m., the crew had vanished, leaving behind stunned, bound guards and a gaping blackened hole in the side of the nation's financial rail car. The Roaring Twenties had just witnessed its richest, darkest score. Part 2. The Birth of Hoover's Bureau. Chapter 4. The President's Fury and the Post Office's Shame. The next morning, the headlines screamed across the nation. Millions stolen in train holed up, and America's mail violated. The reaction was immediate and seismic. Asterisk, President Calvin Coolidge was reportedly livid. To the quiet, conservative Coolidge, the theft was not just a crime against property. It was a brazen attack on the sovereignty and security of the United States government itself. He demanded immediate, overwhelming federal response. Asterisk, the Post Office Department was humiliated. They had promised impenetrable security. The postal inspectors, who had historically been the premier federal investigators, were now seen as having failed catastrophically. The public trust, the very foundation of the mail system, was shattered. In the hallways of Washington, D.C., a young, ambitious, and ruthlessly efficient director of a lesser-known agency saw his opportunity. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the Bureau of Investigation. Hoover had been struggling to assert the BOI's jurisdiction over high-profile crimes, which were typically handled by the Post Office or the Treasury Department. The mail robbery provided the perfect casus belli. This crime was too big, too professional, and too symbolic for anyone else to handle. Hoover staked his career on solving the Elizabeth robbery, promising a level of scientific, systematic investigation that was alien to the old guard of federal policing. He introduced concepts that would revolutionize law enforcement. Asterisk, fingerprint standardization. The robbery emphasized the need for a national fingerprint database, a key project Hoover championed. Asterisk, the G-Man mystique. Hoover began carefully cultivating the image of the federal agent as an incorruptible, highly trained professional, sharply contrasting with the oft-corrupt local police forces. This was the genesis of the G-Man legend. Chapter 5. The Trail of the Hot Money. The investigation that followed was unprecedented in scope. Hoover's agents, the early predecessors of the FBI, didn't chase rumors, they chased paper. The biggest challenge was the nature of the loot. Much of the haul was in negotiable bonds and securities. These were practically worthless to the thieves, unless they could be monetized, a process that would require slipping them into legitimate financial markets. The investigators began meticulously tracking every high-denomination bond reported stolen. The trail eventually led them from Elizabeth to the underground financial networks of New York City, and then surprisingly, far south to the corrupt political and financial circles of Miami, Florida. Miami, in the mid-1920s, was a boomtown, a chaotic paradise of illicit money, Prohibition-era rum running, and quick, dirty deals. It was the perfect place to launder the stolen wealth, is greater than amazing fact. The investigators discovered that Willie D'Urso had established a shell corporation in Miami, specifically to clean the stolen bonds. He was planning to use the laundered money to invest in a massive and legitimate real estate development near Biscayne Bay, effectively transitioning from the king of thieves to a respectable Florida millionaire. The focus shifted from the who to the how. Asterisk. An undercover operation, disguised as a high-stakes bond brokerage firm, was set up in New York. Asterisk. A key accomplice was eventually identified. In the autumn of 1926, the newly assertive Bureau of Investigation had managed the impossible. They had identified the perpetrators of the nation's largest ever robbery, recovered a significant portion of the paper assets, the negotiable bonds, and demonstrated a forensic competence previously unheard of in American law enforcement. But the real prize, the mastermind, Willie D'Urso, and the massive pile of non-traceable U.S. cash remained tantalizingly out of reach. D'Urso was a professional ghost. His strategy of using the stolen money to fund legitimate businesses, particularly real estate speculation in Miami, was a brilliant distraction that simultaneously cleaned the funds. When his lower-level accomplices started falling to the BOI dragnet in New York and Florida, D'Urso did not panic or fight. He simply activated a prearranged escape plan, the Golden Passport to Havana. The first stop was Havana, Cuba. In the Roaring Twenties, Havana was less a foreign city and more a criminal extension of the American mainland. It was the ultimate sanctuary from prohibition and, crucially, from American federal law. There was no formal, functional extradition treaty between the two countries that covered crimes like mail robbery in a predictable manner, and the local Cuban authorities were notoriously open to and dependent upon American cash bribes. D'Urso didn't hide in Havana. He became a wealthy patron. Using a stolen identity and a forged passport likely procured through his deep network of international contacts built during the rum-running days, he slipped out of Miami before the indictments were even unsealed. He established himself in a luxurious villa in the Miramar district, spending lavishly on Cuban politicians, police chiefs, and local businesses. He even reportedly purchased a significant stake in a popular casino, ensuring he was a financially integrated fugitive, not just a man in hiding. J. Edgar Hoover, furious, dispatched his top agents, armed with arrest warrants and sheafs of evidence, to Cuba. They were met with polite, infuriating obstruction. The Cuban police would listen to the Americans, smile, take their gifts, and then report back that the man in question, Mr. William D'Urso, simply did not exist in their records, or that the man who did match the description was a respected, upstanding businessman with an unblemished local record. D'Urso knew Havana was temporary. It was too close, too dependent on unstable politics. His real destination, and the final destination for the largest portion of the unrecovered bonds and cash, was Paris, France. In post-World War I Paris, the financial markets were a chaotic mix of old-world discretion and new-world speculation. D'Urso linked up with a syndicate of European financiers specializing in bearer bonds, securities that belonged to whoever possessed them, requiring no formal ownership transfer documentation. These were the perfect vehicle for cleaning the final, most valuable remnants of the Elizabeth Hall. His method was breathtakingly simple and audacious. The discount. D'Urso sold the stolen U.S. government bonds in Parisian banks at a steep 20 to 30% discount. For a bank, the profit margin was enormous, and the risk was manageable, as European institutions were often reluctant to cooperate fully with U.S. federal inquiries. The investment. The resulting cash, now untraceable European francs and gold, was immediately reinvested in established old money European businesses, including Swiss clockmaking firms and German manufacturing concerns that were rapidly rebuilding after the war. By the time BOI agents secured the necessary diplomatic channels and traveled to Europe months later, D'Urso was gone again. The trail was ice cold, dissolving into a labyrinth of numbered accounts and shell companies that would have taxed the capabilities of modern financial investigators, let alone the BOI of 1,927. The lesson was brutal. The American government could catch the foot soldiers, but the criminal mastermind who understood global finance and transnational escape routes was beyond their reach. D'Urso became Hoover's most infuriating example of a case that was solved, but not closed. While D'Urso sipped champagne in Parisian cafes, his less fortunate associates faced the thunderous reality of federal justice back in Newark, New Jersey. The trial that followed was a spectacle, becoming known as the mail robbery trial of the century. The power of the prosecution. The federal prosecutor, a hard-nosed young lawyer personally selected by J. Edgar Hoover, presented an airtight case. The evidence was damning. Physical evidence. The recovered acetylene torches, unique to industrial use, and detailed analysis of the chemical residue on the damaged RPO car. Testimonial evidence. The confessions of the canary, Solly Schwartz, and the corroborating testimony of the captured wheelman, who were offered reduced sentences for implicating the others. The blueprint. Most damagingly, agents recovered detailed sketches and notes the Elizabeth blueprint from a safe house, showing the layout of the train yard and the internal markings of the valuable mail sacks. The jury was instructed that this was a crime against the sanctity of the U.S. government. The penalty for interfering with the mail was severe, carrying potential life sentences. The defense's shock tactic. The defense lawyers, however, were keen to turn the tables, aiming their attack not at the thieves, but at the victim, the United States Post Office Department. Their primary argument was a moral and societal one: contributory negligence. This argument resonated powerfully with parts of the jury and the public who were already distrustful of powerful federal institutions and the secrecy of the Federal Reserve System. Ultimately, the prosecution's facts overwhelmed the defense's moral argument. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all major counts. The sentences were harsh, designed to be a clear message from Washington, D.C. Several key members of the Elizabeth Gang were sentenced to 25 years to life in federal penitentiaries like Atlanta and Leavenworth. The trials secured Hoover's victory. He had demonstrated the BOI's superiority in investigation and prosecution. In the eyes of President Coolidge and the public, the young Bureau of Investigation had saved the government from utter humiliation. The Elizabeth robbery case successfully established the precedent for the federal government's role in policing complex, multi-state crimes. It cemented the understanding that if a crime involved high-value financial instruments, crossed state lines, or targeted government property, it was a job for federal authorities, paving the way for the transformation of the BOI into the FBI. The convictions were secured, but the shadow of the Elizabeth robbery lengthened. 2 years after the trial, the United States plunged into the Great Depression, 1929. Suddenly, The lingering mystery of the unrecovered $2 million took on a toxic new political and social meaning. The public anger fueled an unprecedented demand for aggressive, righteous federal justice. The failure to retrieve the money was used as a political weapon against the Hoover administration and, ironically, fueled the rise of the FBI. The organization could point to the unrecovered money and argue that the Depression proved the need for more federal power, more centralized databases, and more ruthlessness against criminals holding the nation's wealth hostage. The public needed a hero, and Hoover, ever the self-promoter, supplied one. The G-Man, the incorruptible government man. The Elizabeth Robbery's legacy shifted from a tale of theft to a foundational myth of the G-Men, proving the old system obsolete and giving Hoover the political mandate to build the modern FBI, setting the stage for the dramatic. The decade following the Great Mail Robbery and the onset of the Great Depression was a period of existential crisis for American law enforcement. The public was terrified by the rise of public enemies gangsters like John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, and Machine Gun Kelly, who exploited interstate travel and ineffective local police to commit spectacular crimes. J. Edgar Hoover and his Bureau of Investigation, BOI, soon to be the FBI, seized this moment, positioning the federal government as the only force capable of restoring order. But even with the new powers granted by Congress, in 1934 allowing agents to carry arms and make arrests, Hoover still faced one intractable problem: the fugitive ghost, the D'Urso problem, and the public's power. The lingering frustration over the escape of Willie D'Urso was a constant, irritating thorn in Hoover's side. The Bureau knew D'Urso was alive. They knew he was living off the stolen Elizabeth millions. But without international jurisdiction or the modern surveillance capabilities, they were powerless to locate him. He was the perfect example of a criminal who had vanished into the ether, proving that a purely professional internal investigation could fail against a highly organized foe. Hoover began to realize that the Bureau's biggest weakness, its limited manpower and lack of ground-level reach, could be solved by leveraging its greatest strength: national publicity. During the manhunt for John Dillinger in 1934, the Bureau had experimented with mass media distribution, plastering flyers and wanted posters across train stations, post offices, and police departments. The public response was overwhelming. Citizens, eager to help and motivated by patriotism or rewards, provided hundreds of tips. It was the public, after all, who ultimately helped locate and corner Dillinger. From flyer to formal list, this success planted the seed of an idea that would only be formalized years later. The conceptual framework for the most wanted list can be traced directly back to the Elizabeth Robbery's unsolved fugitive problem. The formal creation of the list happened decades later, in 1950, but the stated reason for its creation was the same as the frustration over D'Urso in 1927: to mobilize the entire American populace in the fight against crime. The catalyst for the formal list was a seemingly small event. A local reporter in 1949 asked the FBI for a list of the toughest guys they were looking for. The resulting story received such massive national attention that Hoover recognized the immense power of a sanctioned, official, and nationally distributed top 10 list. Hoover formalized the process, creating the 10 Most Wanted Fugitives program. The selection criteria reflected the lessons learned from the Elizabeth case. Asterisk: severity of crime. They had to be fugitives connected to the nation's most heinous or high-value crimes, like the Elizabeth mail robbery. Asterisk: publicity value. The fugitive had to be someone whose capture would attract national attention and serve as a warning. The list was, in essence, a weaponized press release. It transformed the passive act of investigation into an active, nationwide manhunt, turning every post office wall, every newspaper page, and every TV screen eventually into an FBI billboard. It guaranteed that a criminal like D'Urso, who had exploited obscurity to escape, would never again have the luxury of blending in. The Elizabeth robbery gave the FBI the political mandate. The most wanted list gave it the permanent public spotlight. Chapter 10. The Ultimate Fate and the Enduring Mystery. The Elizabeth mail robbery officially closed its books in the late 1950 seconds. But the case never truly concluded, leaving behind a legacy cemented by two facts: the massive institutional reform it triggered, and the enduring fate of its mastermind, the unofficial death of Willie D'Urso. Willie D'Urso, the quiet architect of the $2.4 million heist, was never officially brought to trial in the United States. Intelligence gathered over decades by the FBI strongly suggested that D'Urso lived out his days in Italy or France, sustained entirely by the income generated from the unrecovered cash and assets laundered in Europe. The FBI tracked rumors that he used his ill-gotten wealth to live as a semi-retired gentleman, a true gentleman thief of the Gilded Age, whose crime was so perfectly executed that he escaped the consequences of the Sonfline American system. The most accepted, yet still apocryphal, accounts suggest D'Urso died sometime in the mid-1950 seconds of natural causes. The unrecovered cash, the vast majority of the cash taken from train number 5, over $1.5 million in 1926 dollars, was never recovered. This money likely flowed into the black economy, funding Prohibition-era operations, foreign political corruption, and establishing the groundwork for organized crime syndicates that matured in the mid-20th century. The sheer longevity and scale of the funding provided by the Elizabeth robbery ensured its profound impact extended decades beyond the crime itself. The Elizabeth robbery of 1926 was not just a heist. It was a foundational moment in American criminal history. It was the crime that exposed the vulnerabilities of the old system and forced the creation of a new, nationalized, and aggressive federal police force. The failure to catch Willie D'Urso was the precise engine that drove J. Edgar Hoover to forge the FBI from the Bureau of Investigation and ultimately create the 10 most wanted fugitives list, a spectacular, media-driven tool of justice whose roots lie deep in the dark, gaping hole cut into the side of an RPO car in Elizabeth, New Jersey, on a cold night in the Roaring Twenties. The criminal was never caught, but the crime itself led to the creation of the ultimate tool to catch all who followed. This concludes a detailed and fact-rich narrative outline for your historical saga. The Great Mail Robbery was not just a theft of cash. It was a sophisticated financial raid. The contents of train number 5, car Gnome 46, represented the liquid assets of the entire U.S. financial system, in transit between commercial banks, the Federal Reserve, and regional post offices. Understanding the 3 distinct categories of stolen wealth is crucial to understanding the investigation and D'Urso's success. The loot categories: why some was easy to clean and some wasn't. The official $2,437,133.47 haul was composed of 3 primary asset classes, each requiring a different method for monetization. 1. Cash, the king. Asterisk, value stolen. Approximately $400,000, $500,000. A precise figure was never confirmed, as cash is untraceable. Asterisk, asset type. Mostly high-denomination Federal Reserve notes, $1,000 and $5,000, bills destined for bank vaults, along with factory payrolls, smaller bills for regional industries. Asterisk, monetization method, instant liquidity. Cash is fungible. It can be spent immediately. D'Urso's strategy of fleeing with the bulk of the high-denomination currency was a perfect move. Once spent on gambling, real estate, or bribes outside the U.S. financial system, like in Cuba, it vanished instantly. Asterisk, FBI challenge, 0 trace. Without serial numbers being recorded, there was no way to track these bills. This is the portion D'Urso successfully used to finance his escape and lavish lifestyle abroad. 2. Negotiable government securities, the bulk. Asterisk. Value stolen. The vast majority, estimated at over $1.5 million. Asterisk asset type, predominantly Liberty bonds and high-value bearer bonds. Asterisk bearer bonds were critical. They grant ownership to whoever possesses them, requiring no signature or identity verification for transfer. They were common at the time, offering anonymity. Asterisk monetization method, the discount laundering. This is where D'Urso's genius lay. He knew a legitimate bank would check the serial numbers against the federal hot list of stolen securities. Instead, he sold the bonds on the underground market or to corrupt foreign banks at a massive discount, 20–30%, in places like Paris and Switzerland. Asterisk. For a European financial house, the opportunity to buy U.S. government-backed assets at 70 cents on the dollar was irresistible, and they often intentionally ignored the due diligence, claiming ignorance if later questioned by the BOI. The bonds were then slowly reintroduced to the legitimate global market, making D'Urso's money clean. Asterisk. FBI success, the serial number trace. The Post Office Department and the BOI did have the serial numbers for these bonds. This allowed agents to set up the undercover bond brokerage that eventually snagged Solly Schwartz. Every time a bond surfaced, it provided a lead, proving that while D'Urso was moving fast, the paper trail was moving with him. 3. Non-negotiable instruments, the trash. Asterisk. Value stolen. Approximately $300,000. $400,000. Asterisk. Asset type. Certified checks, money orders, stock certificates, and registered mail receipts. These required a valid signature, proper endorsement, or specific ownership documentation to be cashed. Asterisk. Monetization method. Worthless, mostly. The thieves quickly realized these instruments were too difficult and risky to use. Forging a signature on a certified check guaranteed a federal investigation. Asterisk. FBI benefit. Quick recovery. Most of this material was abandoned quickly by the thieves, often found dumped in nearby ditches or incinerated. This quick disposal, however, provided crucial forensic evidence, like partial fingerprints and tool markings, that helped confirm the identities of the captured gang members. The dawn of forensic accounting. The Elizabeth robbery, therefore, became the BOI's masterclass in forensic accounting. J. Edgar Hoover didn't just need G-men with guns. He needed accountants who could follow the global paper trail. Asterisk. Centralized tracking. The case forced the U.S. government to establish the first centralized registry for stolen bonds and securities, a rudimentary version of what the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit would rely on for decades. Asterisk. Tracking discount rates. Agents learned to look for suspicious transactions where U.S. bonds were sold far below market rate, a telltale sign of a hot asset being laundered. Asterisk. Establishing intent. Proving that the thieves intended to convert the stolen paper into cash was critical for the prosecution. The recovery of D'Urso's Elizabeth blueprint and his Miami real estate plans provided the irrefutable evidence that this was a plot not just to rob, but to financially liquidate the assets of the United States government. The heist in its complex financial structure was both D'Urso's triumph, he got the cash, and his downfall. The serial numbers on the bonds led to his organization's collapse. The lessons learned here were paramount, setting the standard for how federal agencies would pursue white-collar crime and organized theft for the rest of the 20th century. The true, lasting consequence of the Great Mail Robbery of 1926 wasn't the unrecovered cash or even the captured gang members. It was the narrative that J. Edgar Hoover successfully built around the BOI's response. The robbery provided the perfect, sensational proving ground for the G-Man, the incorruptible, highly trained federal agent who superseded the often corrupt, regionally limited local police forces. The media campaign, Hoover, was a master of public relations long before the term was common. He recognized that to secure the Bureau's perpetual power and funding, he needed to control its public image. The Elizabeth case, with its high stakes, professional criminals, and international scope, became the basis for this transformation. Asterisk, the contrast. Hoover ensured the press emphasized the modern, scientific approach of the BOI, fingerprinting, forensic accounting, meticulous tracking of serial numbers, against the old-fashioned, brute force failure of the Post Office Department's railguards. Asterisk, the image of infallibility. While D'Urso escaped, Hoover focused the narrative on the fact that every other member of the largest criminal gang in U.S. history was convicted with a perfect prosecution record. The message was clear. The federal government gets its man, eventually. Asterisk, the G-Man mystique. The term G-Man, short for government man, gained traction during the 1932 manhunts, but its ideological foundation was laid by cases like Elizabeth. These agents were portrayed in newsreels and emerging crime magazines as clean-cut, college-educated heroes, a powerful symbol of order in a nation struggling through the Depression and Prohibition chaos. Legacy of centralized authority. The Elizabeth mail robbery ultimately served as the first piece of crucial evidence Hoover presented to Congress to argue for the expansion of federal jurisdiction. It proved, asterisk, crime is now interstate and international. A New Jersey crime could involve Florida laundering and Parisian fugitives, demanding a national, centralized response. Asterisk, state and local forces are insufficient. The complexity of tracing bonds and securities was beyond the scope of local police departments. Asterisk, the mail is sacred. The fact that the crime violated the U.S. mail system gave the federal government a unique constitutional imperative to pursue the criminals with unmatched resources. By 1935, the Bureau of Investigation was formally renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, endowed with the sweeping powers and public trust it still maintains today. The escape of Willie D'Urso was never forgotten. It became a permanent cautionary tale, the organizational failure that directly fueled the creation of the most wanted list, ensuring that the public's eye would become the final, indispensable tool of the modern G-Man. The train robbery didn't just move money, it shifted power, forever changing the balance between crime and justice in the United States.